It's their first taste of freedom. Researchers are releasing several Przewalski horses into the wild.
In August of 2001, at the edge of the Kalamili Nature Reserve in northwest China's Xinjiang region, 27 horses stood at the mouth of a transport enclosure, facing the open Gobi for the first time in their lives. The land in front of them was harsh, dry and sparse, receiving less than 7 inches of rain a year, the kind of environment most domestic horses would struggle to survive in at all. These were not domestic horses, they were Przewalski's horses, the world's only truly wild horse species, and every single one of them had been born in captivity, descended from a tiny handful of animals gathered from zoos decades earlier. As their transport gates opened, they hesitated at the threshold for a moment. Then they ran straight into the desert and into what would become one of the most closely watched species reintroductions on the planet. To understand why this moment mattered so much, you have to go back to 1878, when a Russian explorer named Nikolai Przewalski encountered a small, stocky, dun-colored wild horse living in the Dzungarian Basin, in what is now Xinjiang, China. Unlike the domestic horses found across the rest of the world, this species had never been tamed or bred by humans. It had evolved on its own, in isolation, for tens of thousands of years, developing a shorter, stockier build, an upright mane, and a genetic lineage entirely distinct from every domesticated horse breed on Earth. Scientists later confirmed it as the only living, truly wild horse species left. Everything else classified as domestic horses that had gone feral. Physically, Przewalski's horses are unmistakable once you know what to look for. They stand noticeably shorter and stockier than most domestic horse breeds. With a dun-colored coat, a pale belly, dark legs often marked with faint striping, and a short, upright mane that stands straight up rather than falling to one side the way a domestic horse's mane does. Even their chromosome count sets them apart. Przewalski's horses carry 66 chromosomes, 2 more than any domestic horse, and the 2 can still interbreed and produce fertile offspring despite that genetic difference, a detail that has fascinated geneticists for decades. For decades after Przewalski's discovery, small wild populations persisted across the Gobi Desert region, straddling China and Mongolia. But habitat loss, competition with livestock for scarce water and grazing land, hunting and brutally harsh winters steadily eroded their numbers. By the late 1960s, the species had vanished from the wild entirely. The last confirmed wild sighting came in 1969. From that point forward, every single Przewalski's horse alive existed only in zoos and breeding centers scattered around the world, descended from a founding population of roughly a dozen animals captured decades earlier. The wild version of this ancient species was, for all practical purposes, gone. China's effort to bring it back began in 1985 under a program that would later become known as the Wild Horses Return Home Project. Chinese wildlife officials imported a small founding group of horses from zoos and breeding centers in Britain, Germany, and the United States, and established a dedicated breeding center in Jimzar County, deep in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. The goal from the very beginning was ambitious, not simply to keep the species alive in captivity indefinitely, but to eventually return it to the wild landscape it had disappeared from generations earlier. The early years were slow and uncertain. The breeding center sat far out in the Gobi, with unreliable electricity and no telephone connection to the outside world, staffed by a small team of veterinarians and caretakers working largely in isolation. Then, on March 8, 1988, a founding mare known as German No. 2 gave birth to a foal named Yungar No. 1, the first Przewalski's horse born on Chinese soil in the modern program. It was a small milestone, one single foal, but it proved something crucial. These animals could not only survive the harsh climate of their ancestral home, they could thrive in it well enough to reproduce. Over the following 13 years, the captive population at Jimsar slowly grew, generation by generation, under careful management to preserve as much genetic diversity as possible within a tiny founding gene pool. By 2001, the program's leaders judged the population strong enough and the animals prepared enough through a specific rewilding process designed to reduce their dependence on humans to attempt something that had never been tried before in China, releasing a group of them directly into a fully wild, unfenced desert landscape. That release, in August of 2001, sent 27 horses into the Kalamali Nature Reserve, a vast protected area covering part of the Yungar Basin. Nobody could be entirely certain what would happen next. These horses had been born in enclosures. They had never had to find their own water sources across open desert, never had to navigate around predators without human intervention, never had to survive a full Gobi winter completely on their own. The first results were sobering. Several horses did not survive their first winter in the wild, unable to cope with the extreme cold and scarce forage without any human support. Rather than treating this as a failure and abandoning the effort, wildlife officials adapted their approach. They began rounding up the released horses each winter, providing supplemental feeding and shelter during the harshest months, then releasing them again each spring to roam freely and forage on their own through the warmer seasons. This hybrid approach, full independence for most of the year with a safety net during the deadliest season, became the model for how the reintroduction would proceed going forward. It worked. Within just 2 years of that first release, the very thing conservationists had been hoping for finally happened. A foal was born to parents living entirely in the wild, the first wild-born Przewalski's horse in China in more than 3 decades. By 2013, the reintroduced population across the Kalamali region had grown to 89 horses, organized into 14 separate groups, some breeding herds and some bachelor groups of young, unattached males, a level of natural social structure the species had not displayed on Chinese soil in generations. Scientists from the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute later partnered with the Xinhua program to study exactly how these horses were adapting to their harsh new environment, using satellite tracking collars to follow their movements across the desert. One of the most interesting findings involved a related species called the hulan, or Asiatic wild ass, which also lives in the same desert region and competes directly with the horses for the same limited water sources. Researchers found that in this fierce competition over scarce desert water, in a landscape receiving less than 7 inches of rain annually, the reintroduced Przewalski's horses were consistently able to outcompete the more skittish hulan for the best watering sites. A small but telling sign of just how successfully these once captive animals had reclaimed their ancestral role in the ecosystem. The program kept expanding well beyond that first release site. Over the following 2 decades, release sites spread from Xinjiang into the neighboring regions of Gansu, Inner Mongolia, and Ningxia, giving the recovering population access to a much wider stretch of its historic range. Generation after generation was born entirely in the wild, with almost no direct human intervention beyond winter monitoring and occasional emergency support. By the mid-2020s, wildlife rangers were tracking a 6th generation of Przewalski's horses growing up outside any enclosure at all, animals whose great-great-great-grandparents had been the first to walk out into the Gobi back in 2001. The most recent chapter in this story unfolded in the spring of 2026. On April 22nd, a group of 30 more Przewalski's horses completed their rewilding training and were released into the Kalamali Nature Reserve, the latest in an unbroken chain of releases stretching back a quarter of a century. Following that release, the wild population tracked specifically within Xinjiang had grown to 392 horses. Nationwide, across all of China's release sites combined, the total Przewalski's horse population, wild and captive bred together, had surpassed 900 individuals by the end of 2024, representing roughly 1/3 of the entire global population of the species. Consider the scale of that turnaround. In 1969, the last wild Przewalski's horse on the planet was seen and then never confirmed again, leaving the species alive only behind fences in a scattering of distant zoos. Fewer than 20 founding animals ultimately gave rise to every Przewalski's horse alive on Earth today. And from a tiny founding herd imported into a remote corner of the Gobi Desert in 1985, China's reintroduction program alone has grown a population that now numbers in the hundreds, roaming freely across some of the harshest, most water-scarce terrain in the country, entirely without fences, entirely without domestication, exactly as their ancestors did before humans nearly erased them from existence. For a long time, scientists assumed Przewalski's horses represented the direct wild ancestor of all domestic horses, the last surviving branch of the same lineage humans first tamed thousands of years ago. A genetic study published in 2018 overturned that assumption. Researchers analyzing ancient DNA found that Przewalski's horses actually descend from horses herded by the Botai culture in what is now Kazakhstan, roughly 5,500 years ago, animals that were themselves domesticated and later escaped or were released, going feral and eventually evolving into the distinct wild population Przewalski encountered centuries later. In other words, Przewalski's horses are not simply humanity's last, untouched wild horse. They are the descendants of an ancient domestication event that reversed itself, a population that went from wild to tame and back to wild again, long before any modern conservation program ever got involved. That makes the species not just a rare survivor, but a genuinely unique case study in how quickly and how thoroughly an animal can shed domestication and revert to a fully wild state, given enough time and the right pressures. Behind the population numbers are individual rangers who have spent entire careers with these animals. One veterinarian, Zhang Hefan, arrived at the Jimsar Breeding Center in 1995 when she was 21 years old and newly graduated, at a facility she described as feeling almost impossibly remote, reachable only by a road running deep into the Gobi. Over the 3 decades that followed, her work involved learning to recognize each horse individually, not by tags or numbers, but by the same small details people use to recognize each other: a particular limp, a distinctive marking, a familiar temperament. Her job, in her own description, was to notice what others might miss. That kind of sustained individual attention, repeated across an entire team of rangers and veterinarians for 4 decades, is easy to overlook in a story about population statistics, but it is arguably the real engine behind every number in this recovery. China's program did not develop in isolation. A parallel reintroduction effort had already been underway in Mongolia since the early 1990s at sites including Hustai National Park and Takhintal, using horses drawn from the same small global captive population held in European and American zoos. The 2 national programs have occasionally exchanged genetic information and lessons learned, since both are ultimately working from the same narrow founding gene pool and facing many of the same core challenges: harsh winters, competition for scarce water, and the difficulty of preparing zoo-born animals for a fully independent life in open desert or steppe terrain. Comparing outcomes across both countries has given researchers a broader picture of which rewilding techniques actually work, and which simply sound good on paper. Information that has, in turn, fed back into how later releases in Xinjiang were planned and executed. There is also an ecological dimension to this story that goes beyond simply saving one species. Large grazing animals like Przewalski's horses play an important structural role in desert and steppe ecosystems, trampling and disturbing soil crusts in ways that allow certain plant seeds to germinate, dispersing other seeds through their droppings across long distances, and creating grazing patterns that can help maintain a mix of vegetation types rather than letting any single plant species dominate. Some researchers studying desertification in Xinjiang have pointed to the returning horse herds as a small but genuine contributor to slowing land degradation in parts of the reserve, alongside deliberate conservation policy, though this remains an active area of ongoing study rather than a fully settled conclusion. Either way, the reintroduction was never only about the horses themselves. It was about restoring one working piece of a desert ecosystem that had been missing a key component for more than 3 decades. Today, the Przewalski's horse remains the only truly wild horse species left on the planet, and thanks to that decades-long effort, it is no longer confined entirely to captivity. It is back in the desert it evolved to survive in, competing for water, raising foals, and slowly reclaiming a landscape that, for more than 30 years, had gone completely without it. If stories like this one about species pulled back from the very edge of extinction are the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe and I will see you in the next one.